Interesting lost and found cities. Hey everyone, it's Alexa again, and welcome back to another video. It's not surprising that with how long we've been on this earth, there are still lost cities being found as they were left hundreds and sometimes thousands of years ago. Here we've come up with a list of some of the more fascinating lost places that were eventually stumbled upon. Welcome to Interesting Lost and Found Cities. But before we get into today's video, make sure that you're subscribed and ring the bell so that you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Machu Picchu. While we've all probably heard of Machu Picchu, the magnificent Inca citadel in Peru, did you know that at one point it was lost? In fact, it stayed hidden away and unknown to the world at large until 1911, although the site was known to locals. It was built sometime around 1450 and 1460, and was only used for around 80 years, and then it was abandoned. In stepped Hiram Bingham in 1911, who came across the incredible and iconic structure during his Yale Peruvian expedition. It was an old prospector who mentioned the ruins at Machu Picchu according to Bingham, and he had to go and see them for himself. At the time, the ruins were mostly covered in vegetation, leading Bingham to take a few measurements, photos, and notes, but he left them behind in search for the Inca capital. He then returned in 1912, and it was then that the site was cleared and the importance of Machu Picchu came to light, some 340 years after it was abandoned. Calakmul. This Mayan site can be found in Campeche in southeastern Mexico, and it was a major Maya power during the Classic period. It is thought to have been built near the end of the Middle Pre-Classic period between 550 and 300 BC. It remained an important center for the Maya for a very long time, but like all good things, that had to end. Calakmul lost most of its influence and importance by 900 AD, but some still held on until its complete abandonment in the 1530s. Fast forward many years, right around 400 to 1931. That was the year that Calakmul was first reported in modern times by Cyrus Lundell. Throughout the 1930s, the site was mapped out, but for some reason its study was abandoned and archaeologists didn't return until 1982. Now it is the primary focus of some kind of project being undertaken by the National Institute of Anthropology and History. Leptis Magna. This city was once located in the Mediterranean at the mouth of a river called Wadi Lebdam. It was essential to Roman Libya and the Carthaginian Empire and was originally a Phoenician city established in the 7th century BC. It was then expanded by Roman emperor who was a native of the city, Septimius Severus. It had the protection of the 3rd Augustan Legion for a time, but the legion was dissolved in 238 AD, leaving Leptis Magna open to raids, which occurred quite often. It gradually lost its importance and eventually entirely fell in 647 AD in the Muslim invasion and was then abandoned. It was located again sometime before 1816 because part of a temple from the city was taken to the British Museum in that year, although its exploration and excavation began in earnest with the arrival of the Italians. They conquered Italian Libya and dedicated efforts to rediscovering the city, which they did in the early 1930s. Gobekli Teeth. This ancient and incredible Turkish archaeological site is surrounded in mystery, and no one knows precisely what it was used for or why it was abandoned. It's believed that it was possibly constructed around 10,000 BC, but was then intentionally buried and left behind about 2,000 years later. The site consists of 2 different phases that are thought to have been used in its social interactions or in a ritualistic nature, but nobody knows for sure. Gobekli Teeth remained untouched for some time but gained inhabitants during the Classical period. It was again abandoned and left alone until being mentioned in 1963 in a survey that was conducted by the University of Chicago and Istanbul University. It wasn't excavated until around 1995 after Klaus Schmidt, an archaeologist from the German Archaeological Institute, read notes from the 1963 discovery. It was then that the site's importance came to light, and Gobekli Teeth has been infamous in the archaeological community ever since. Mesa Verde. You may have heard of this historical site located in southwestern Colorado, as it is believed to be the largest cliff dwelling in all of the United States. The first people to live in the area, Paleo-Indians, arrived in around 9500 BC, and their numbers began to swell around 2,000 years later. It was later, though, during the Archaic, that semi-permanent cliff shelters were built, and the basket maker culture emerged by 1000 BC. These cliff shelters preceded the ones we see today. The cliff homes at Mesa Verde weren't built until around the end of the 12th century AD. Then, droughts plagued the area, causing a period of environmental and social instability, and by 1285, the area was abandoned entirely. Mesa Verde wasn't rediscovered until the 1870s, and it took until the early to mid-1900s to excavate it. Karabrae. Karabrae can be found on the largest island of the Orkney archipelago of Scotland. Occupation of the Neolithic settlement began way back in 3180 BC, and the people there stayed until around 2500 BC. It's believed that a change in the climate of the area may have caused Karabrae's inhabitants to leave, as around the time of abandonment it became wetter and colder. Others think there could have been some kind of catastrophic storm that hit and forced the people out. So, no one really knows why exactly they left, but they did, and the settlement sat abandoned until 1850, when a massive storm exposed Karabrae. Excavation quickly began, but was abandoned in 1863. Then, Karabrae sat unbothered until 1913, when the site was plundered in one weekend. Another storm exposed it again in 1924, and it was in 1927 that a professor from the University of Edinburgh got involved and finally put Karabrae back on the map. Troy. This famous city that sits in what is modern-day Turkey was once an important and influential place, and it was the site of the legendary Trojan War. The city is well known today, and that probably has something to do with it being referred to in both the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. It has also been mentioned in many other famous writings and has been a focus in stage performances as well as on the big screen. The city, in the 3rd and 2nd millennia, was a pretty significant cultural center. Then, after the Trojan War, it was abandoned for more than 400 years. It was later resettled by the Greeks around 700 BC and was renamed Ilion, but was once again abandoned in 500 AD. The location that we know as Troy today was lost for some time until a man named Charles McLaren confidently identified it in 1822. Pompeii. Here is a site that kind of stands apart from the rest, not because of its importance at the time, but because of what caused the destruction of the city and the preservation of it. Pompeii was a Roman city in Italy in the Campania region near Naples. First settlements at Pompeii can be dated back to around the 8th century BC, and things really started moving after the Greeks showed up in 740. It flourished for hundreds of years but was completely wiped out in AD 79 in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. More than 1,500 people's remains have been found between Pompeii and another city at the time, Herculaneum. It's thought that some unearthing of the city might have taken place in 1592, although whatever was discovered was subsequently reburied. Herculaneum was rediscovered in 1738, at which time a Spanish military engineer got involved and began excavating, which led to the eventual refinding of Pompeii in 1748. Corral. Here's another ancient city located in modern-day Peru. It was an old settlement which sits around 120 miles north of Lima in the Supe Valley. You may be wondering just how old Corral could be, so we'll tell you that it's known as the most ancient city yet discovered in the Americas. It's one of the largest and most well-studied Norte Chico sites that we know of, and it's believed that the city was inhabited beginning in 2600 BC. The thing is, it was only inhabited until right around 2000 BC, at which point the 3,000 or so occupants just up and left, and no one truly knows why it was abandoned. It was rediscovered in 1905, but no one took it seriously, as archaeologists thought the structures were made relatively recently. It was looked at again in 1948 when it was found by Paul Kosok, an American professor, although its finding wasn't considered very important at that time either. Finally, in 1975, a detailed record of Corral and sites around it in the Supe Valley was made, and it was finally able to get some of the recognition it deserves. Thonis Heraklion. We're gonna be brief here. Heraklion, which is also sometimes called Thonis or Thonis Heraklion, was located about 20 miles northeast of Alexandria, near the Heracleotic or Canopic mouth of the Nile. It was built by, at the latest, the 12th century BC, but over time, earthquakes, rising sea levels, and tsunamis ravaged the land and eventually caused Heraklion to sink beneath the sea. They remained in the water undisturbed until 1999, when they were found by Frank Godillo. We've seen a lot of cities that were once lost already, and we still have one more to go. But But first, we'd like to ask, do you think there are more lost cities out there that might one day be found? If so, do you think the finding of any of these legendary cities would be able to top the ones on this list? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Petra. This incredible ancient city in southern Jordan was once called Campania by its inhabitants and became the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. It's thought that settlement of the area began as far back as 9000 BC. The Nabateans were traders, and their trading earned them quite a bit of wealth, which was focused in Petra. It's been estimated that at its peak, Petra may have housed some 20,000 people. Then, the city fell under the rule of the Roman Empire and began losing its importance with the rise of trading via the sea. In 363 AD, the Galilee earthquake hit and destroyed various structures, but Petra is believed to have still flourished at least up until the 6th century AD. It's believed that it was left alone entirely sometime in the 12th century, and it stayed that way until the 19th century. In 1812, Petra was found and described by Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss traveler.